Week 2. Let's talk about it. Let's start with the headlines. Miami is the best team in the AFC, the best team in the NFL. Okay, I'm not ready for that. But the fact that I'm even suggesting, is it a topic, I think is a real thing. These are two really nice wins, maybe, but they're on the road. And I mean that as we know the Chargers seem to be a mess, but we know it's a very talented team. I think that Pats defense is serious. I think it's a real plus for who they are. So you could spin this either way. You could say, hey, the Chargers are a mess. The Pats aren't going to be any good. So is it really that big of a deal? But I think to start the season and have Tua have the game he had in week 1 and then a Dolphins defense that you like some of the pieces to do what they did in week 2. They've won 2 games in very different ways, a shootout and then a defensive game against New England. And when they needed to close it out at the end, they were able to close it out on the ground because it wasn't a great game from Tua. The fumble on the 3rd and 1, what they were trying to do, they kept it. The pick wasn't necessarily great because it was a bit of a pop-up. But at least we have the week 1 sample. And they did this also without Jalen Phillips, who I think is their best defensive player who wasn't active in the New England game. I want to talk about Coach McDaniel because we've wondered, and I still think there's something to watching the NFL where most of us, despite how much we watch, how much we're into it, you're like, okay, but what is this guy actually doing that makes things work? I don't know that it's explained to us enough from the people that are supposed to know everything. Hell, I'll see film room battles on Twitter. This is an example of a TV show. Somebody who studies film and then claims to know exactly what's happening and then gives us a take, and then it's immediately dismantled by somebody else who has a really good resume and will study film. This happens all the time. There should be a TV show on some sports network where it's like film versus film, and then both guys will present the same film and then their original point, and then the audience is left to decide. And then we get to throw shit at screen grab Twitter guy who thinks everybody was open and that lanes were wide open to run through. Because I'm at a loss when I think I kind of know something, and then I'll see somebody present something and go, wow, that's pretty compelling. That's really interesting. And then somebody else who played will go, no, that's totally wrong. And then this happened. And I'm like, I don't know what to believe anymore. All right. But I do know this. When you pay attention specifically to the motion that Miami runs in their offense, it is devastating against opposing defenses. I'm to the point, especially after last night's game, because it was something I was really looking for. I think I'd be telling my defensive guys in a matchup against the Dolphins, again, not a coach, not a linebacker, like, do not fall for the motion. Do not fall for it. Hell, be ready to go to the other side of the motion because it seems like motion is the best distraction in this Miami offense. And I understand motion and the concepts and what you do and you're trying to disguise or figure out, well, obviously a lot of times it's just trying to figure out man or zone and that kind of stuff. And some of it can be a little more simple than we realize. But there's a couple plays in particular with McDaniel in this motion offense where when you watch it happen, you go, this is just really nice stuff. And it makes your life easier in this offense. The 2nd and 19 Waddle conversion, they ran Hill out in motion. And if there was one thing that was very clear that New England was trying to do was take away the deep ball. And they played deep, they played off, and they moved when Hill moved. And Hill moves out to the right side in motion. And you can see Waddle actually comes back to make the reception, and it's mostly yak on this conversion. But as soon as Hill moves out to the right side, 3 defensive players from New England on the right side move backwards. They just move like it's magic. They have to move because they're worried about Hill. On the Mostert TD, the first one, they looped the running back, number 26, who had a couple touches in this game. They loop him back around to the right side. They run it left. On the Tyreek touchdown, Tyreek's outside, but then Smythe goes to motion, number 81, the tight end, to the far right. It pulls people away, and then Hill has a really nice one-on-one turn and catch where it felt like the defensive back was a little late to it, but you're so freaked out against Hill. And then Mostert on the long TD run that closed this one off, there's motion all the way to the right behind Mostert, and it actually set up a block that they didn't necessarily even need. Motion makes people move. On the second Mostert TD, when you look at it from the back cam, 3 New England defensive players all shuffle to their left away from where the run is designed. And so there are times when I watch motion and it's just to run it and then have a guy set up. Miami does it, and they press the motion like right up until the snap, and it's freaking everybody out. And it freaked out what ultimately I thought was a pretty good defensive effort from New England in this game after seeing what Miami did last week. There's a couple other things in here. New England might stink. We know the defense is going to be good, and I still have a hard time believing like a Bill Belichick team is just actually going to be terrible, right? Terrible is not 8-9, but odds makers had him as the fourth team going to the AFC East. We were curious what Mac Jones is going to look like. You could also say, well, wait a minute. If you think Philly and Miami are really good, which I think we all kind of feel is a safe bet, then New England lost, well, 2 home games, but they lost to 2 of the better teams in the NFL. Okay, we could do that. That's fine. I'll allow it. But on offense, I don't know what they are. It always looks disconnected, and sometimes it looks like a mess. There rarely will be a possession now through the first 2 weeks of the season where it feels like New England has consistent rhythm for what they're trying to do. Some of that's the offensive line. Some of it's the lack of weapons. And some of it's Mac Jones. You have to think it's better than what they did last year just based on weapons and the coaching staff alone. So it's kind of not on one part of it, but it's certainly on all of it. How many times do you watch them drop back and you think, yeah, this isn't comfortable. This isn't what they originally thought they were going to do. And now they have to kind of improvise. And I don't think Mac Jones is at a point where you want him improvising all over the time. I think Mac Jones even gets frustrated. Like the pick that he threw, I like when guys will throw a pick for a 50-50 ball. I don't want to see somebody never throw any picks because that means you're just never going to give your guy a chance. But is Devontae Parker worth a 50-50 deep shot? And then Mac had another play later where he threw into double coverage. And I appreciate that he knew he had to press the issue a little bit more other than checking down. It's like, cool, you lost by 4 instead of 11. But there's also times with him where I think his frustration alone makes him raise the risk beyond what's an acceptable level of risk. So I'm not a big Mac Jones believer long term, but I don't think this is really easy for him. And like we said, I mean, last year's never going to make any sense to me ever. I sit there and say no weapons. I look at the salary cap breakdowns. They spent the most money of any team on tight ends and wide receivers combined last year. They spent the second most on wide receivers based on salary cap spending last season. You're like, where is it? They spent the most on tight ends this year. Wide receivers more middle of the pack. The Matt Patricia part of it's like John Mayer deciding to have Miranda Sings and backup. The DeAndre Hopkins rumors were so dumb because you're like, yeah, receivers used to come there for a discount when it was Brady, but as soon as Hopkins wanted to get paid, you knew they weren't going to get him. The Ezekiel Elliott edition, you go, cool. It's like your dad drafting Dez Bryant this year in your fantasy draft. You're like, oh, I think I'll take Dez Bryant. So whether it's the draft picks, whether it's the coaching staff stuff, whether it's the fact that post-Brady, Belichick's been 25-27, and maybe it is playing 2 of the best teams in Philly and Miami. I don't want to doubt him. I think Belichick is a great coach. I'm not into the post-Brady stuff as much as I've had fun with it over the last couple of years of thinking this guy can't get it. But if they're bad again this year and the offense looks this bad and Mac looks like somebody you have to replace, if you did make a change at the end of the year, what would you really be changing from post-Brady? One other thing here, Tua is now 5-0 against the Pats. But when you look at the Dolphins' schedule, I know Collinsworth was talking about it last night, how it finishes up really good because these first 2 road wins for Miami, they've got 4 of their 5 last games at home, which means they're not going to be having to travel to brutal weather places, except for maybe Baltimore on New Year's Day. But they have a brutal overall schedule. I mean, they've got Buffalo coming up. They've got Philly. They've got New England again. They've got Kansas City. They've got Dallas, Baltimore, Buffalo to finish. So I don't know if the record will match what we've seen from them in the beginning, but I think the bigger point is that 2 weeks in, it's totally fair to wonder with how the rest of the AFC has looked if this could actually be the best team in the conference. Staying with that, Baltimore's 2-0, and they were in control of the game against Cincinnati. I know the final score would say that it was close, but it just felt like they were really in control the entire time. Lamar doesn't have a TD yet, but he's completing 77% of his passes. This wide receiver group 1 through 5 is Flowers, who I love, the rookie. Odell, who I know left the game, but they're saying it's not serious, whatever. Bateman, who's decent enough. Duvernay will make you some plays. And Aguilar, who had a couple nice catches yesterday, going with Mark Andrews. 1 through 5, that's really good in the NFL. It's the best Lamar has ever had. But the defense that we didn't I'd say going into the year, you wouldn't put their defensive unit at the top, but they did this without Marlon Humphrey yesterday, who's their best corner and probably in the second tier of best corners in the NFL. But since his offense now scored since his offense has scored only 10 points before Jones, that's what Chuck Sizzle with the return touchdown. Remember him? Iowa didn't have any catches. Purdue had 1 million catches before they got the Kirk Cousins TD, which is the down 2-score TD late. So it makes the final score 27-24, but they were in total control of this one. Then Baltimore needed a run clock. They did it in 7 plays. They're taking a knee and winning this game. So Baltimore's defense stepping up. The conversion rate for Lamar has been pretty good, even though we haven't had the big dynamic production games. And yeah, look, maybe Cincinnati's in trouble. The first game wasn't all that much of a challenge at Baltimore, but I just love the fact that you look at the receivers on the depth chart and you're like, this is so much better than previous years. On the other side for Cincinnati's offense, we already touched that where, the extra 7 points is on the return. Since he has had some bad starts in previous years, last year they started 0-2, 21 they started 3-2, which is fine. But then in 20 in Burrow's first year, they were 0-2 and then actually went 1-5-1. So maybe Burrow's used to this, but he's not used to this. Yards per attempt 2 years ago, 8.9, 7.4 last year, 4.3 through 2 games. You can talk about the Cleveland weather, and it's completely fair, and I'm not like all of a sudden there's some Burrow jokes about the contract extension. I'm not talking about that, and it appears he re-aggravated the calf part of it. But it also looks like, and I give Barnwell credit for pointing out that Burrow was throwing so much outside the numbers, a career-high attempts outside the numbers in that game against Cleveland. But there was also something that he points out that Cleveland was doing where it's like, you want to go ahead and take those deep shots, go ahead. They're going to play it straight up. I felt like Baltimore was going, you're never going to have enough time for those deep shots, so we don't care. If you want to chunk away with Mixon, fine, but you're going to get impatient. Your receivers are going to want the ball. And Higgins, who finally got some touches, and Chase, who still isn't there yet. But I don't know if that's the new formula against Cincinnati, where they will not have enough time to beat us on these deep shots, and then Burrow has to speed it up. And if they want to run, they can go ahead and run. But at least that's what I'm seeing in those first 2 games. Not great, but certainly not like full alarm yet. Final thought, Kansas City's defense. Really nice win going into Jacksonville and holding them to 9 points. Now, granted, there was a touchdown there late where if the receiver stays in bounds, maybe it's a tie score, Jacksonville pulls it out, fine, whatever. But in a year where this Jacksonville team, we feel like they're loaded up on offense and ready to go, and a Kansas City defense, which traditionally has not been a strength during the Mahomes years, that I thought was really impressive. 4 sacks, 3 of 12 on third down for the Jags. They've invested, I think, more than they get credit for in kind of overhauling this defense on the fly as they try to match all the talent with Mahomes. On the other side for Kansas City's offense, 18.5 points per game, the lowest since 2014. Granted, 1 game without Kelsey. I'm never really going to worry about their offense, but I really liked what I saw from a defense that is always part of I wouldn't say part of the problem, but never felt like a strength with the Chiefs there. Nice win against another team that I think is still in the picture in the AFC. Best win, Giants coming back against Arizona. Largest comeback since 1949. But the biggest part of this is, I'll admit, I think like a lot of you, when you're watching how bad it was, you're like, man, I can't believe they paid Daniel Jones all that money. And now you don't get to do that. I may still think it privately. I may say it publicly again at a later week when I don't think he's going to be that good. But at least you avoid all that stuff. That's why I think that's the best win and not Washington. Because Arizona's not really even playing for anything, even though you felt good at least for 30 minutes for Josh Dobbs. So I have Giants' best win because of the historic comeback and the Daniel Jones part of it, and not Washington because I have that as the worst loss, so I wasn't going to just do the same thing. Denver loses after being up 18. Sean Payton, thanks to Mike Sando on this note, was 72-0 when leading by 18 points. Not the case now after the 35-33 loss against the Commanders.